Hey everybody, Dr. Snellgrove here, and recording a video going over chapter 13, which starts on page 304 in the book. Chapter 13 covers arguably one of the most important concepts in the book, in the English language, in the world of writing, subject-verb agreement. With that being said, I was as delighted as you probably were to discover chapter 13, kind of short. So let's go for it together. All right. So it starts off on page 305 with some of the basic stuff I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with, like shifting from first person to second person to third person, singular and plural. So like I walk would be me describing, I don't walk enough, but I walk would be describing what I do. You walk, describing what you do. He, she, it walks, describing what a person or a pet, maybe a robot, it does. Plural, we walk, you walk, they walk. All right, very, very straightforward stuff. And this builds off some of the stuff in the previous chapter, chapter 12. Regular verbs follow the pattern above, right? So it's like, I sing, we sing, you sing, he sings, they sing. It's very kind of straightforward there, as opposed to irregular verbs, which we covered in the previous chapter, that will, sometimes have to change a little bit dramatically as you conjugate them in different ways. All right, and towards the bottom of 305 and the top of 306, they do a reminder of something that I'm willing to bet most of you know, even if you know it only on an unconscious level, right? The idea of, okay, normally we have a singular subject and then the verb ends in S. And sometimes we'll have a plural subject and the verb doesn't end in S. So the classic example they give at the bottom, we got the cat walks. So the singular cat, the verb is walks, versus the cats walk. So we have a plural subject cats and we have walk that doesn't have the S. I don't know if this actually helps anybody memorize the stuff, but the book occasionally breaks out into weird poetry. And so they've got a poem entitled The Singular S. When verbs are in the present tense, you never need to guess. The singular third person verb always ends in S. All right, so far so good. This is very, very straightforward. And they have more examples of verbs ending in S on page 306, like I confess, we confess, you confess, all of that fun stuff. So it's like when the verb already ends in S, the third person singular form changes by adding ES. So for instance, all these others were I confess, you confess, we confess, and then he or she confesses. All right, so we switched to that third person singular, so we had to add the ES at the end of it. Now, I said this in chapter 12, and I'll continue saying it. Y'all are probably sick of hearing it, but I'm a big believer in saying this stuff out loud, and your ear can catch many mistakes that your eyes did not. So you may not have known about the little rule about, oh yes, third person singular, verb ending in S, add ES to it. You may not have already known that. But I'm willing to bet if you heard, or especially if you said a sentence like, he confessed to the, he confessed what he did, what he has done. It's like, wait, he confesses what he's done. Okay, it sounds wrong, so it needs to be fixed. All right. Speaking of the third person, that is what it's talking about on 306, the very bottom of it. And some of this is maybe all of this is going to be kind of obvious to you. It's saying that like a third person singular noun, or I'm sorry, third person singular subject includes any noun or pronoun that can be replaced by he, she, or it. So they give a weirdly diverse example of like James, Miss Smith, cat, table, child, one, bank teller, and Abraham Lincoln are all third person singular. So each one of these needs a present tense verb that ends in either S, or if the verb already ended in S before, ends in ES, right? So it's like you might have well, I think if we plugged any of these into what we had before, like Abraham Lincoln confesses, that he loves the theater a little too much. Dark, stuff like that. All right. So this, again, this is stuff that makes a little more sense, I think, as you're doing it, or maybe y'all already have a good handle on this, but I know some of this is pretty basic. Now, on the top of 307, we talk about something that we chatted about briefly in chapter 12, the verb to be, right? So these are the different forms of, and the most famous, most common, as it says, irregular verb, to be. Because it's like, all right, this changes up based on different configurations. So first person, I am. Second person, you are. Third person, he is. Plural, we are. And they are, if you've got a plural third person. So stuff you're pretty familiar with, but as an example of how, sometimes people seem surprised at the idea of English being the most difficult language to learn. It's like, so much weird stuff like this that's just not intuitive. All right. So we already talked about this, weirdly enough, earlier in the chapter, but the middle of 307, they have the fundamental rule we're talking about, hey, if you've got, as a singular subject and then the verb, that verb in the present tense is going to end in S. Susan takes a walk every morning. So Susan is singular, so we got to have a verb ending in S. Here's one that Floridians know too well. A hurricane spins in a huge spiral around a central eye. So you got the singular hurricane, and then you got spins, the verb ending in S, as opposed to things where you have to change this up, like at the bottom one, they have, in the kitchen of the new restaurant, crates of dishes and glassware wait to be unpacked. So we've got crates, we've got a plural subject, we got a subject ending in S, so the verb itself does not have an S. Crates wait versus a singular crate that waits. It's weird. All right. I feel like I say this a lot in our chapters. We're not going to go over all of these, but I figured we'd look at some of the practice items on bottom of 307 going into the top of 308. All right, so number one, we've got, and the way these are structures, I'm sure you can tell, it's got different forms of the verb, and you try to find which one fits. So we've got Roberto insists, or Roberto insist. Sorry, I know this sounds very similar on my southern tongue, but one ends in S and one doesn't. On biking every day, rain or shine. So Roberto insists. We need the one that ends in S because Roberto himself is a singular subject. So we need the present tense verb that ends in S. Now we get the curveball almost right away. Number two, if Karen impress, or if Karen impresses the interviewer, she will have a good chance of getting the job. So the correct answer is impresses. And the reason for it is the rule we talked about before, where we've got a singular subject, but the present tense verb already ends in S, so we have to add ES to it. So that's the grammar rule, and I do hope you'll learn the grammar rule if you have not done so already. But this is yet another example where I'm willing to bet if you say it out loud, you can very quickly suss out which one is correct. If Karen impressed the interviewer, it sounds like a caveman talking. So that's clearly not the answer we're going for. All right. Looking on, let's see. Here's number 4. We'll build on some stuff from the previous chapter. The names of Trevor's goldfish is or are Mo, Larry, and Curly. I guess Trevor's a classic comedy fan. All right. So we have to go with are. And maybe that's obvious to you, maybe not. The reason I say maybe not, we talked about in a previous chapter, what a lot of people do, I guess the book kind of encourages you to do, is find the verb first and then work your way backwards to find the subject. So if you see is or are there, and it's like, okay, I got to figure out which one to use. Let's look at the subject. The first thing you're going to see is goldfish. Goldfish is singular. So you might be tempted to say goldfish is. But not only would that not make sense with the rest of the sentence, but look back. This is part of a prepositional phrase, of Trevor's goldfish. Remember, prepositional phrases, 3 words. They give us extra info, but they can technically be taken out. The sentence still makes sense. And crucially, the subject is never, ever, ever part of the prepositional phrase, or the verb for that matter. So you could just shorten this to the names are Mo, Larry, and Curly. And the more important part of this is that you're able to isolate that names is the subject. Names is plural, so we have to have the plural verb are instead of the singular is. All right, and let's see. I'm going to do one last one, number 9. Jaleesa's dad quiz or quizzes her dates about their driving habits, where they are going, what time they will be home. All right, this one's, relatively speaking, kind of straightforward. It's like, all right, dad is our subject here. All right, so dad quizzes her dates about their driving habits. And so this is a straightforward, I say straightforward because quizzes is the singular. Dad quizzes versus dad's quiz. So it all comes down to that singular versus plural. All right. So with that in mind, moving on 308, kind of the middle of 308, problems in subject-verb agreement. And I guess I've been kind of giving the game away because this is a section practicing something that we have already been talking about in the previous chapter and this chapter, which is like, hey, what if you have a prepositional phrase between the subject and the verb? You want to be able to identify that in order to identify the subject. So they have a pretty pertinent example here. Example number 1, the members of the softball team practice every afternoon until 5. All right, so this is deja vu all over again. You see where the verb is, and your first instinct might be to look at all right, what is the word closest to it? Oh, the word closest to it is team. So I'll just say team practices, right? Wrong, because if you look at the sentence, the members of the softball team. So that's technically a 4-word prepositional phrase. So that can't have our subject in it. The subject is technically members. And in case, like I'm deja vu all over again, in case you're unclear about that, see if it still sounds okay when you take the prepositional phrase out. The members practice every afternoon until 5. It does. So, of the softball team gives us good extra info, but it is not info that we need, on a grammatical level. And in this case, it helps us identify we have a plural subject, so we need a correspondingly plural verb to go along with it. All right. And we'll look, I feel like we are doing this. So we'll look at maybe 2 of these on the activity in the middle of 309 about eliminating prepositional phrases. So you've got number 1, the hands on the clock seem to have stopped. Okay, so in this case, you know where the verb is. It's just a matter of finding which one's correct. So we look back. On the clock is a prepositional phrase. So you could just say the hands seem to have stopped. In fact, that probably is how you'd say it if like you and a friend were looking at the clock. The hands seem to have stopped. You might not say the hands on the clock seem to have stopped. The prepositional phrase is useful info, but not necessary info. You can take it out and it helps you see that the subject is not clock. The subject is hands. The hands seem. Okay. Let's see. Here's another kind of wild one. That's a lot. The loudness of the music in the cardio room of the fitness center makes or make the walls shake. I stayed in an apartment one time. Well, I didn't spend a lot of time in the fitness center, but it did get pretty loud in there. All right. So speaking of loudness, we got to figure out like, okay, what is our actual subject here? So you see the verb, we got to figure out makes or make, but what are the prepositional phrases? So this is another one where there's 3 of them just right next to each other. So the loudness of the music in the cardio room of the fitness center. Each one of those is a separate prepositional phrase. And so you could take it out. Once again, you can double check. Does this make sense? The loudness makes the walls shake. Oh, it does. We've got a subject verb complete thought. So the rest of this is technically just extra info. Good to have it, not necessary. And once again, it helped us isolate what the real subject is so we could use the correct verb. All right. Bottom of 309. I said this was a short chapter. It feels like draining. That's what I get for recording these guys back to back. All right. Bottom of 309 going to the top of 310. Indefinite pronouns as subject. All right. So indefinite pronoun is another word where, like, I feel as if we have made this sound more complex than it actually is, right? Because people are like, oh, what the heck is an indefinite pronoun right here? And it's like, oh, it's just a pronoun that doesn't refer to a specific person or thing. An indefinite pronoun is a pronoun not referring to anything definite. We don't have to overthink it in this case. So they have a list of indefinite pronouns that are always singular. And this, I know I keep saying this, you're probably already sick of hearing this, but this is another case of something that will maybe make more sense to you verbally, or maybe I should say auditorially, than it makes visually. Because you've got things like, all right, the word everyone or everybody. All right, we use these words to describe like multiple people, right? Everyone in the room, or everybody here, everybody watching this video. And yet we phrase this, we treat it as a singular subject. So like once you're getting the party started, you're like, everybody is here. And so it may be confusing sometimes when you write it out, like, oh, this looks kind of like a plural word, and then we have this singular verb. But imagine saying it or just hearing it. Everybody are here. Instantly sounds incorrect, and it needs to be fixed. So it's easier maybe just to memorize, because it's a pretty short list, right? All things considered, math is hard. 16 things on here to memorize, and these are always used as singular for the purposes of your writing. And that will come up, not specifically quizzed on that per se, but like future chapters really build on that information. All right. And so they have a, I don't even want to read that memory jogger. It's kind of weird, honestly. But on 310, near the top, but not at the tippy top, they have examples of singular verbs used with singular indefinite pronouns. So here's one. If no one comes to their yard sale, Pat and Amy will donate the goods to charity. All right, so no one is considered singular. And it might make sense when you look at it like no one. So that's considered singular, so we have to have if comes as the proper verb. If no one comes to the yard sale, right? And once again, say it out loud, like if no one come to the yard sale, just sounds strange. All right, each of the party guests has been asked to bring an inexpensive gag gift. Let me tell you, nothing more awkward than bringing the gag gift when that was not the kind of Christmas party it is. Really, I still shudder. All right. So what are we doing? This sometimes weird students out too. The word each is itself considered a singular subject, right? So we've got a 4-word prepositional phrase in here, of the party guest. So it's a prepositional phrase. Subject can't be in there, just chuck it for our purposes. So each has been asked. And that one can be a little tricky because sometimes people say each have been asked. Like, doesn't that make sense? It's like, it sort of makes sense, but these are the rules. This is why English is the most difficult language to learn. All right. I don't think we have to necessarily do the practice activity there because we've been doing these. I mean, most of those are pretty straightforward. Like if you look at number 1 on there, neither of the contestants was or were prepared to lose. So of the contestants is a prepositional phrase, so we can chuck that out. So neither was prepared to lose. And that's another one that I wasn't kidding earlier. It's good to just memorize those indefinite pronouns on the previous page, because there are times when you might hesitate. Like I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, neither, I think 2 people. So it might make sense to say neither were, but it's like, nope, it's an indefinite pronoun we treat as a singular. So neither was. That kind of goes for the next one too. Probably the last one we'll do. Like everybody on the street passes the homeless man without a backward glance. Okay, so on the street, this is a prepositional phrase. So we can, kind of eliminate that for our purposes. So it's like everybody pass or everybody passes. Everybody passes the homeless man without a backward glance. And again, if you say it out loud, everybody passed the homeless man. Sounds a little weird. I guess if you leave it like that, it sounds like an imperative command, which is kind of weird. All right. Whew, bottom of 310, going to the top on page 311. Really hesitated there. You can tell I'm an English professor, right? What number comes after 310? 311. Good band. All right. So in all seriousness, this gives you examples where, hey, what if you get a subject that comes after the verb? Because that can happen, in your writing and other people's writing. I'm always saying like, hey, subject, verb, complete thought, but it's not always in that order, right? And so it wants to make sure that you are comfortable identifying, like, okay, what is a subject and verb when they're not in the places you expected them to be? Might be one way of saying that. So the first example on 311, there are no more tissues left in the box. And it's like, okay, well, are is our verb. It's like, what is it referring to? Well, tissues. Tissues is the only thing it could be the subject in here, right? Like, and I know y'all are probably already sick of hearing this, but the only other thing that you could possibly confuse for the subject, if it's not tissues, it's box. But look at that sentence construction, in the box. So that's a prepositional phrase. Subject can't be there, so it has to be tissues. Here's one. On top of the refrigerator sit Doria's lost keys. Okay, so we've got sit as a very obvious, kind of action verb. What is sitting up there? It's keys. And, I like to think this one's pretty straightforward, pretty logical anyway, but this is another one where you could eliminate, like, all right, of the refrigerator is a prepositional phrase. So it's like, it's not going to be refrigerator. It's not going to be Doria. She's not sitting down. It has to be the keys. It's the only thing that could be the subject in that particular sentence. All right. Let's see if we can power through here. I think we're getting close to the end. We got like 2 pages and change left. All right. So compound subjects. This is on the bottom of 311. And this builds off something we talked super briefly about in chapter 12. Compound subject just means that there is more than one subject that is being affected by a verb. So I think in chapter 12, we had something like Cedric and Joseph sat on a bench. So it's the two of them and they sat. We have one verb and we have 2 subjects there. All right. So this kind of builds off this, like, hey, how do we structure the verbs when it comes to compound subjects? All right. So the good news, keeps it nice and simple, is when you have, and this is the simple part, because the last part gets kind of weird. Fair warning. All right. If you have compound verbs, now I'm doing it. Compound subjects, and they are joined by the word and, you always have to use a plural verb. That makes sense, right? We're talking about this person and this person did something. Cedric and Joseph sat. Both of them did it, so we have to use the plural sat. And once again, just sound weird if you're like Cedric and Joseph sit on the bench. Cedric and Joseph sat on the bench. So yeah, when you have compound subjects joined by the word and, you just treat the verbs as plural and call it a day. So they have several examples of this on 312. So like, Keisha and her brother are scheduled to arrive today. Straightforward, right? It's Keisha and it's her brother. So we have to go with are. All right, Keisha and her brother are scheduled that day. It's like, all right, yeah, we've got to, that's what you do. We wouldn't say Keisha and her brother is scheduled to arrive. That would be the singular, right? But we've got 2 subjects, so we have to use the the plural verb. All right, we'll look at maybe a couple of these examples. We're probably not going to look at the activity, but all right. So a good book and a warm fire are ideal companions on a winter night. All right, this sounds like a person after my own heart here. So we've got a good book and a warm fire. Book, fire, joined by the word and, so we have to go with the verb are. Once again, we wouldn't say a good book and a warm fire is ideal companions. Here's a short and sweet one. Patience and persistence pay. They adore alliteration, don't they? So Pay is, of course, that's the plural verb, the plural form of that verb. Normally it'd be like patience pays off, persistence pays off. But now patience and persistence. All right, we got two things. So we got to go with the plural verb pay. All right, now is where we get to the weird part.
Here's what I found.
I'm never talking to you, watch. All right, so when you've got two subjects and they're joined by the word and, you just use a plural verb all day, every day, all the time. Don't got to worry about it. But what about when you have compound subjects joined by anything else? All right, so on the very bottom of 312, going to the top of 313, he talks about how sometimes we have compound subjects that are joined by the words or maybe you have a setup that uses either or neither nor. So what do you do when you have compound subjects like that? Here's the rule. It's the only rule. So please learn it and memorize it. You're going to use the verb that fits the subject closest to the verb. So let's look at some examples of this. Okay, so near the top of 313, we have Keisha or her brother is or are scheduled to arrive today. All right, so this one is maybe a little more straightforward because you just have to remember they're separated by or instead of and. So it's like, okay, Keisha is singular subject, brother is a singular subject, so we have to go with the singular verb. We have to go with is. Keisha or her brother is scheduled to arrive today. But they throw us a little curveball here, kind of in the middle of 313. Keisha's brothers or her parents is or are scheduled to arrive today. Well, it's a little bit of curveball because now we've just got two plurals, right? Brothers or parents, but it's still, we got to have the plural verb to go with the plural subject. So far, so good. However, the rubber kind of meets the road. This is kind of the bottom half. My watch thinks I'm talking to it again. The bottom half here, where what if you have two subjects, compound subject, one is singular and one is plural. So they have an example here. Keisha or her parents is or are scheduled to arrive today. Ruh-roh, Raggy. Keisha is singular. Parents is plural. So which one do we go with? Well, you don't have to overthink it. In all these cases, like what is closest to the verb? All right. Parents, the plural parents is closest to the verb. So we have to go with are. Keisha or her parents are scheduled to arrive today. And then it goes in reverse too. They have another one where it's like Keisha's parents or her brother is or are scheduled to arrive today. Well, we got plural parents. We've got singular brother separated by the word or. So we have to go with what is closest to the verb. It's brother. Brother singular. So we have to go with is. And this is one of those annoying exceptions to the thing I'm always talking about, because some of these may sound weird to your ear. For me personally, it sounds weird to be like, Keisha's parents or her brother is scheduled to arrive today. If I'm just saying that out loud, I'm probably going to say are without even thinking about it. But this is one of those little grammatical rules. It's very important to learn. All right. So we have more examples here. I think we'll look at the examples on the bottom of 313, but not necessarily the practice exercise. Then we can wrap things up. So we've got a term paper or an oral report is required in Mr. Hansen's class. Okay, so this one's a little straightforward. You got paper, that's singular, report, that's singular, separated by or. So it doesn't really matter though, right? Because each of them singular, we got to go, as long as you remember the or part, we got to go with singular verb is. Versus a term paper or two oral reports are required in Mr. Hansen's class. Well, now we're cooking. So we've got a singular paper, then we got the word or, and then we've got the plural reports. So paper or reports. All right, well, which one do we use? Well, in this case, we got to go with what is closest to the verb. Reports. The plural subject is closer to the verb, so we have to go with the plural verb. All right, and I think that's about it. I do really encourage you. Like, there's almost no way of saying this that doesn't sound like a threat, which I don't mean it to. But I do periodic quizzes, even in a whether it's a short semester class, a long semester class, there's usually at least 4 quizzes. And so I always have a quiz on subject verb agreement, hint, hint. And this is an area that has confused my students because it's not the whole quiz. It'll only be like 10 questions, but I often have several questions on there about like, hey, we got compound subjects separated by either, or joined, I should say, by either or, neither nor, or just or, that kind of stuff. It's like, do you know which verb to use? And it always comes down to use the verb that is closest to, or look to the subject that's closest to the verb. That's all you got to do, but it throws people for a loop. All right, that's it for chapter 13, a tad longer than I thought it would be. As always, if y'all have any questions, if you want to email me, or you're always welcome to text me at 863-835-2399, and I hope you have a good one. Bye.